There's a 19th century leadership philosophy known as the great man theory that attributes turning points in history to so-called great men who are imbued with superior intellect, courage, charisma, and divine inspiration. The theory claims that leaders are born and are destined for both leadership and power. It's a theory that's been rightly criticized, but its remnants can be seen in the bronze statues, monuments, and plaques throughout the nation. Some of these artworks have received our societal stamp of approval, say a statue of Abraham Lincoln, while others, particularly lately, have come crashing down, like statues of Robert E. Lee. But the fundamental problems with all of these statues, whether they're of men we consider heroes or villains, parallels the criticisms of the great man theory. They're reductionist, they're ignoring context, and most importantly, they're leaving out so much of our collective story. Right now, you can see the country wrestling with the complicated legacies of our great men and their attendant artworks and monuments. What do you do with a statue of a man like Thomas Jefferson, who penned the words, "All men are created equal," but also owned over 600 human beings as slaves? Today, I want to explore the inherent issues with artworks like the statues of a great man that are being venerated or removed throughout the country, and to suggest, perhaps radically, that nearly all of them have outlived their utility. Instead, creating new public artwork with an emphasis on storytelling and crafting nuanced narratives will be a key component of healing a raw nation. The truth is, we can do better than this anyway. We don't have to settle for the bronze. If artists are storytellers and pieces of public art are our shared stories, it's easy to see that so much of our story is missing. Women, Black and brown people, LGBTQIA, Native American people, and religious minorities of all kinds are largely left out of the public art record. And we're missing an opportunity to take a deeper look at our culture, ideologies, values, and struggles. An historic investment in public art and a renaissance of storytelling shouldn't be considered a luxury at this tumultuous moment. Rather, it should be considered prerequisite to move forward. New art and creativity will help us grapple with the historical wrongs that our nation has not yet looked squarely in the eye. It can begin to heal a people divided by politics and rent by pandemic. And most importantly, new art can collaboratively shape a new narrative for the United States that fosters inclusivity, innovation, and moves towards more equity for all marginalized communities. That's the work that art is really meant to do. It's meant to open up a space for dialogue and get us out of thinking in simple categories of who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. As a nation, we've got a lot to untangle, and great art is the way that we tell stories about complicated things. Novelist James A. Baldwin once said that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. I love this quote because it's something that you can measure your city's current public art inventory against. Is the statue of a great man in your town, maybe a founder or a war hero or other notable son, is he trying to be an answer, or is he trying to get us to ask better questions? If I erected a new statue of Abraham Lincoln, is the subtext of the piece that the question of slavery and racism has been answered? Or is it asking us to think about what our next steps should be on our way to addressing perhaps the most singular issue our country has ever faced in systemic, sustained racism? How could we supplement the iconic image of Lincoln through additional installations to make sure that it's the latter and not the former? The same thing applies to Thomas Jefferson, who I mentioned in my opening. Does the artwork that we have help us ask questions and reflect on a founding father whose accomplishments were many, but who is still so very wrong on the issue of slavery? Or does it simply ask us to erase Jefferson's wrongdoings and decide for us that his enslavement of people wasn't important? One of the first things that I learned about when I started my own personal journey of discovering what it means to be anti-racist or confront my own biases, a journey that I should say should be lifelong for every one of us, was that we needed to get comfortable being uncomfortable. To even begin to heal a nation that's never really done the work to understand our original sin, we have to kind of be honest for the first time. And what I've come to understand is that our statues of great men are keeping us in this comfortable narrative that just isn't good enough anymore. We have to get uncomfortable with messy, complicated conversations about our past, present, and future. If we set up the right civic mechanisms, we can become curators of our public art inventory and step into that uncomfortable space of viewing old installations through modern eyes. We can and should review those things regularly and make decisions about which pieces of artwork are doing the work that we hope for in our public spaces and which ones should be removed. If we think of ourselves as curators of the public spaces that we all share, then each municipality will need a system, just like any museum or gallery space has. First, we need to make a comprehensive accounting of the public art and interpretive signage that are already in our community. We've got to quantify it with a little bit of data. When was the piece erected? For what purpose? Is it in good shape or is it in need of repair? Next, we need to look for who or what is not there and really talk about it. Do we have artwork that represents the people that lived in our area? Do we have diverse viewpoints? Have we fairly accounted for the history of our area or have understandings of what a piece means changed? Are there deficiencies in our collections and things that we'd like to work towards in the future? And then importantly, we need to have a comprehensive framework for what curators call deaccessioning from a collection, which is the process through which we can remove and rehome or dispose of pieces that no longer do the work on the public sphere that we would like them to. Taking a piece off display is never going to be without controversy, but if a conscientious and diverse group of citizens meets regularly and discusses criteria for keeping a piece, amending it, or taking it down, the piece stops becoming historical background and starts becoming part of a living art collection for a community. Criteria that can be considered might include the item's physical integrity, its provenance or authenticity, its context within the entire scope of the area's artwork, and its perceived value to public discourse. And at the point in which a city has reviewed artwork and found that changes need to be made, an organized system for the dispossession of the piece can be undertaken, and that might include appraising, auctioning, or retiring a piece to a private collection, and sometimes even making apologies and amends to a community that was hurt by the statue's presence. After we've reviewed the artwork that we've already got, the most important thing that we can do is start investing in new pieces. We need to do this urgently, and we need to fund it. One progressive policy example that's making headway in funding new art is the Percent for Art ordinances. These programs encourage or require large-scale development projects to devote a percentage of the total cost of the projects to put into public art. But we have to advocate for these funding streams to be diverse. We need public-private partnerships, grants, tax incentives, sponsorships, and anything that we can leverage to build that shared art collection. The value of this investment is well documented, and we have to make that case to our funders, politicians, and decision makers. It's good for economies, placemaking, community pride, quality of life measures, and so much more. But right now, public art has a special role to play in helping us craft new narratives based in equity and can help our nation contend with some of our most difficult issues, including not just systemic racism and the history of slavery, but it can also tackle issues like women's rights, LGBTQIA equity issues, the opioid crisis, the hollowing out of industrial American towns, our relationship with immigrants and religious minorities, just to name a few. Representation matters, and right now the representation is largely serving a white male-centric view of history. I'm especially concerned about bringing this type of art and all-important funding to our rural American towns. Our country's urban areas have inspiring multicultural energy and focused arts funding, and that's important and amazing. But rural areas rarely see that type of investment in that magnitude, and rural leaders need to understand how valuable these cultural conversations could be in our small town public squares and help us bridge that rural-urban divide. I recently was privileged to work on a sculpture installation project in my own small town and was able to see art evolving in real time to help be responsive to a crisis. In late 2019, when my arts council hired Jim Jenkins of Batavia, Illinois, to construct a sculptural interpretation of our junior high's mascot, the Comets, we never could have imagined how the world would have changed due to COVID-19 by the time the design process started in early 2020. And as fabrication began that summer, the country was engulfed in the protests for Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd. As only an artist can do, Mr. Jenkins deftly grafted our comet into a conversation piece full of meaning about the cycles of the natural world, the forces that bond us together, and the ones that can tear us apart. And he added a special feature, a time capsule in the sculpture's base, so that the students of the school could consider what it meant to be a junior high-age learner in the midst of a global pandemic and a movement where the country was lurching towards a new understanding of what racial justice and equity could look like. He invited the students themselves to ask questions about our place in the universe, and then cast their emotions out to the junior high students of the future. And in doing so, he acknowledged and elevated those young people's voices in a way that was both unexpected and beautiful. That's what artists can do. They take our biggest feelings and our toughest problems, and they bring them out into the light of day and let us each engage, ask questions, and seek understanding. Our artists can be our entry point into these conversations that we know we should be having, but don't even know how to begin. Imagine a world in which we deliberately look to our artists and ask them to help us acknowledge an issue honestly and begin to speak across differences. Our artists and storytellers can make new public works that could be a salve to the most wounded parts of our wounded nation and help inspire us to a greater and brighter future. We have to want it. We have to fund it. And we have to be willing to let go of the things that aren't serving us. The background noise of our lives does not have to be this false narrative of a great man. Instead, it could be the many stories of a flawed people working together to form that ever-elusive, more perfect union. Thank you.